Auto Glass America will fix it and give you up to $150 cash back to help pay holiday bills. With qualifying insurance, we'll come to you with mobile service and install a premium quality replacement with a lifetime warranty at no cost to you. Get a great outlook on the new year with a new windshield and New Year's cash from Auto Glass America. 813-96-GLASS, 813-96-GLASS.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. Now, did you hear that entrance this time? I hope so. Let's hope that that came in loud and clear across FM and AM, because it's time for the program that you've been waiting for today. We're going to get the headline news like nobody else analyzes them, because we're guided by personhood, not tribalism, guided by skin in the game, not blame games. That's boring. That's yesterday's news, and this is today's news, which is what we have come to expect. Challenging sacred cows like nobody else. Let's get right to it. You know, the first thing I wanted to think about and talk about today is just this increasing vitriolic disregard for the humanity of our opponents. That's what you see so much of in discourse today. And it's all this grasping, this desperate grasping of folks trying to create a martyr's energy or a messianic perch for their identity. And whatever that identity is, it is somehow in a competition, a cutthroat competition for other people's identity to see which group of folks can claim to be the ultimate victim. Now, we have talked about this, and even talk radio has talked about the idea that there is a victim Olympics in which people are jockeying for the ultimate social status based on their claim of being the most oppressed. And there are a lot of, emotions around these different arguments. And there's a lot of internecine conflict between what we call the cultural left within their different factions. Who is the most oppressed? But that's also on the right. You have victimism on the right, where people feel like they're oppressed because of their identity, or they're oppressed because of their, people persecuting them. And all of these things have various degrees of touching into reality. But ultimately, it is a fight to the finish for who will reign supreme by being considered to be the most messianic of all identity groups. And that's something that you'll continue to see play out. You'll continue to see conflict arise amongst folks who otherwise seem pretty united when it comes to vilifying or demonizing people who don't fit into their preferred speech codes or aesthetic for how the state should be. But deep down inside, there's a lot of conflict. You have people that say, no, it's my gender identity, pangender, or whatever it is that makes me at the heart of what it means to be an outcast. And then you have another group that says, hey, no, it's females, it's women, feminism. It's how we have been oppressed systematically through the years. And it is our righteous cause which should have, a say in matters of dispute. So that's where you get the clash between the transgender athletes being allowed to do hormone therapy and then participate in female sports. That's an example of those worldviews colliding, because you have some, of course, feminists who say, no. That is appropriating the female experience. That is appropriating the female domain of sports for women and young girls, which is an uncalled for attack against the needs and the freedoms and the expression of women in the world. And then you have folks who are competing on racial identity. Native American, indigenous folks say, hey, look, we need to, we're not getting enough conversation for our, story. And there's a lot of debate there. Not all, of course, indigenous groups are into the victim narrative. but that is something that has been appropriated by the left to try to create a left-wing kind of aesthetic for the oppression that indigenous folks have experienced by the American government. Then you have folks who say, I'm a migrant or Hispanic or different folks who've come over and experienced marginalization, experienced discrimination, stereotypes, feeling like they're an other instead of feeling like they're included. And they say, hey, no. This is where we're going to come in and we're going to be the driver's seat of the narrative of righteous indignation. And then of course, you have the Black community. And within that, you have different narratives that are battling out to see who will define these identity groups. And all of these, of course, will point us in the wrong direction, which should be to protect the human person in all of its varieties. The human person is what should be protected at all times. But that gets discarded because it's more complicated. It's more nuanced. It's not as satisfying to just say, hey, we're going to protect all individual liberties of every human person, no matter what their identity is or external identity markers are. We're going to fight for personal freedom. We're going to protect personal freedom from economic violence, from the collective or exploitation of our labor through confiscatory regulations and taxation and inflation, monetary debasement from the Federal Reserve. No. That's too uniting, right? That just doesn't sell, because you can't make as much money in politics selling protections for the human person. Politics makes you money and power when you are dividing people by groups. If people say, you know what, I'm going to be in solidarity with the human person, no matter who they are, because we all have liberties and we have a right to be left alone. We have a right to not have people initiate violence against us, to sacrifice us for some cause, whether it's their profits through the corporatism policies of the state, or whether it's through a drug war or a war on education, or all the other different wars that these collectivists of all types are always trying to engage in. No, my individual rights should be unmessed with. And that's a story that gets lost in the fray, doesn't it? But it comes back and fits and starts. It comes back and fits and starts because of the power of media. When media displays the ugliness of violence against individuals from the state, it has a way of softening the appetite for disregard for persons, right? When we see, young mothers being arrested for playing on the playground with their kids, when we see people, practicing yoga in isolation on the beach without a mask, getting surrounded by government officials ready to cart them away because it's almost like a robot, there is no mask, I must enforce, and that kind of thing, even though there's nobody around them. It's just, these are rules. It's a very kind of robotic, knee-jerk going along with whatever the authority says, even if it's immoral, even if it's something that you wouldn't really want done to you if you had a conscientious objection to some kind of encroachment into personal liberty. But these things, this pandemic has opened up a Pandora's box for people to remember the importance of personhood rather than collectivism, and that it's the person, not any identity group, that is ultimately the singular, most common scapegoat for all, in groups. It's the person that gets expelled in every situation. It's the human person that experiences the physical violence, the pain, the isolation, the social ostracization, the alienation from one's community after being, expelled by state intervention and corporate alliance with such things. It's the human person that experiences the worst brunt of tyranny and oppression. And always and everywhere, we should always be protecting the human person. And that is the future for uniting folks together across ideological boundaries, across identity boundaries that people feel, safe entrenching themselves in. At the end of the day, that's a false sense of security, because when you trade your individual liberty for some kind of collectivist negotiation with power, eventually the attacks against individual liberty will come back to you. That's what I illustrated yesterday on yesterday's broadcast with the email I read from Elise, a listener from France, who describes how they wanted to take their kid out of government school and start homeschooling them. But of course, Macron said we must protect the folks from Islamic radicalism, so therefore nobody gets to homeschool. Now, this is something that could happen very easily in America here, because both left and right and everybody else is constantly making excuses for the expelling of an individual liberty for some so-called greater good. So if they say, hey, we can't allow homeschooling because guess what? I mean, think about it. If they can do it in France, they'll do it over here. They'll say, well, you can't do homeschooling because enough people were thinking differently about health and nutrition. Enough people were thinking differently about constitutional governance or whatever it is that the establishment thinks is a threat to their status quo. And so therefore, we're going to have to either get you to register and have an official curriculum guide for your homeschooling activities, or we're going to have to get rid of your homeschooling or put some fines or something on it to try to make it very miserable for people to exercise that freedom, right? So always and everywhere, the most important thing that we can unite across all differences around is the protection of the human person from collectivist tyranny. I'm David Gronowski. We'll get into more, including the news and some guests, as we continue after this short message on A Neighbor's Choice. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Do you despise lawyers? That may be the case until you need one. If you've been in an auto accident and need legal advice, go to the local attorneys that have served Tampa Bay families for over 28 years. Catania and Catania. They are family owned. They understand your legal situation. When you need legal representation, Catania and Catania will care for your case from the beginning to the end of representation. You won't need to worry. Catania and Catania will represent you through the entire process. Auto or motorcycle accidents are too frequent in Florida. Catania and Catania. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. Referrals on request. Contact Catania and Catania. Putting families first. Offices, Tampa. An attorney spokesperson.
A Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm David Gronowski. We're broadcasting live across FM and AM with a special focus on our hometown region of Central Florida. Tampa Bay is preparing for Super Bowl, and the first of its kind, where you have a contender in the Super Bowl playing in their own home stadium. And it's a interesting time in which a lot of folks see Tampa and Florida in general as a bastion of a less aggressive desire to police and control every aspect and minutia of our daily lives and our attempts to have life together. And so one can say what they want about the particular sport of football. It is an interesting ritual that always brings out a lot of energy, a lot of emotions, nostalgia, and so forth for folks who, grew up enjoying these games and grew up enjoying the culture that came along with those games. I wrote an article a few years ago in the AmericanConservative.com back in 2017 called "The End of Football." And, it's just simply observing the differences in our culture that have emerged and our appetite for the kind of simulated violence that is found in a game like football. In the article, I say by 2050, the National Football League will be like the Barnum and Bailey circus of today: bankrupt, closed, irrelevant, morally passé. In the early 20th century, the circus was all the rage. After a century of the product's consumption by a culture increasingly sensitive to the abuse of the weak and helpless, in this case circus animals, the greatest show on earth has been relegated to an empty sideshow. It is simply too brutish for sophisticated moderns who wince at the crack of a whip on an elephant's rump. Football will soon follow. Its massive billion-dollar stadiums and marketing machines seem immortal for now, but these titanic playpens will soon crumble under the same cultural force that killed the circus: our culture's growing concern for victims. I'm not judging football's coming demise as a good or bad thing. I see it simply as a symptom of larger social forces that we should understand. The parallels of football and Roman gladiatorial games have been noted before. In the Colosseum, the Roman emperor would have a grand procession into the arena to the standing ovation of the assembled masses. Today, our U.S. Defense Department-sponsored games begin with the procession of the American flag and anthem. It is often accompanied by dramatic aerial flyovers by jet fighters and fireworks, symbolizing the transcendent might and grandeur of America's military conquerings. So, too, the Roman games often reenacted the empire's greatest battles. Today's latest controversy involves whether football players should stand united in honor of the flag. The sacredness of the flag rests in its long-standing ability to unify even enemies as the opposing teams simulate. Like any symbol, the flag serves as a vessel for people to place powerful emotions. Memories of grandpa's military service, apple pie, cookouts, neighborly support for one another are all wrapped in its colors. Above all, the one thing the flag represents the most is the unifying power of sacrifice. We are united as one collective family in our reverence for the flag and anthem. The flag is sacred because it represents, as its loudest defenders proclaim, the blood shed by soldiers fighting for our freedoms. Interestingly, gladiatorial games were first started as sacrificial offerings accompanying funerals. It was thought that the blood spilled by slaves and captives honored the death of state leaders with the transcendent unity of the crowd. With every pitiful animal howl and human cry, citizens felt swept up as one body in collective satisfaction and relief from mundane rivalries and resentments. Today governments like to take the suffering and courage of our sons and daughters who enlist and turn it into a marketing ploy for why we all need government coercion controlling our lives. Who we hire, what we pay them, permission to cut hair, how big our sodas can be, how much we cook our milk, which drug we can use to alter our minds, and so on. Governments also like to transmute our goosebumps we feel when the anthem plays into maintaining a $1 trillion annual foreign policy paid by debt created out of thin air and backed by the OPEC oil cartel's energy markets. At sporting events, Our government captures the nostalgia we feel for neighborhood friendship and family pastimes, associates it with the anthem and flag, and then converts it into a passive, numb surrender to perpetual warfare. Even while the nation divides over whether players should kneel or stand for the flag, our government continues to arm and expand its military footprint overseas and drop more bombs, all in our name. But the state, in collusion with powerful corporate allies, uses spectacles like football to distract and pacify the people. Instead of the violent slaughtering of Roman games, our Christianized culture sends players into simulated padded warfare. We pick teams to unite our personal lives under and forget about the state's socio and economic abuses just outside our doorsteps. Studies even suggest that violent crime drops during major televised sporting events. But now Trump and his liberal mirror rivals have pierced the veil by injecting the NFL with the profanity of politics, the realm where real factions use real violence of the state to punish their rivals through regulations, mandates, and taxes. When Trump said fire them about the protesting players, invoking the specter of both the penal and paternal side of government, forcing people to take sides and not over the gridiron, but at either side of the water cooler and dinner table, it did the game no favors. Eventually, it took a church monk named Telemachus challenging the violent sacrifice of the Roman gladiatorial games to end their carnage. He climbed into the arena and protested until he was summarily slaughtered. His self-sacrifice for the defense of victims led to the public's loss of appetite for the gladiatorial violence. The last known Roman gladiator event was in 404 AD, less than 2 decades after Telemachus' death. Today, myriad scandals serve as a persistent Telemachus threatening to bring the NFL down. Mothers and fathers all around the country are pulling their sons out of football due to the increased revelations of concussions and resulting brain damage caused by the sport. Whereas Roman citizens demanded their fighters stripped of armor to maximize carnage, increased paddings will end up making players look like Michelin men with bobble-headed sized helmets. In Rome, no one cared about how gladiators treated their lovers. Today, growing public disgust with widespread report of spousal abuse is souring the NFL's mystique. In college, the NCAA's state-protected profiteering off of unpaid players' physical sacrifices increasingly criticized as well. Meanwhile, die-hard fans, once thrilled by simulated violence, are losing interest with ever-constrained penalty rules and concussion concerns. The suspension of disbelief required to enjoy the game is waning. Talks of brain damage, flags no longer able to unify people around soldier sacrificial death, spousal abuse, and racial undertones are all exposing football as just a silly game to appease desires for tribalism and aggression and make fat cats owners fatter. Not worth all the drama for some. We should be proud that we do not send hungry lions into arenas with naked prisoners anymore. We have made progress because of Christianity's leavening of the collective history-long abuse against the misfit persons. Yet, absent such gladiatorial games, our culture must confront our sacrifices of the innocent and nonviolent to appease our love for aggression as the means of keeping peace. I wrote that in 2017, and I think as you see the headlines unfold, you'll continue to see this trend continue. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It is an interesting thing that's occurring, where people are losing their appetite for sports to pacify and relax them, because politics is ever injecting into sports. Now we've got a pandemic, and everybody's going to be in there making a story about that during the game. So enjoy the game, but understand that we're in interesting times, and things that we expected to continue on unabated may be changing rapidly, faster than we could imagine. Back in a moment.
There is all kinds of lunacy going on.
Yeah.
The madness of 2020.
No.
Weekdays 11 to 2.
I'm just so fed up with these Democrats. It's unbelievable.
Get it straight from Chris Plant.
They're so hypocritical. It makes me sick.
It's the Chris Plant Show.
This has just got me going on.
And the left is waging war against the police in the United States.
Telling it like it is.
You should be thanked profusely for getting to the point.
You're a voice of reason in the sea of idiots.
The Chris Plant Show. Weekdays 11 to 2. News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Republicans say President Biden's $1.9 trillion proposal is too expensive and not targeted enough. The president and Democrats, though, say they'll move ahead to pass it using budget resolution. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the door is still open for talks.
Our hope would be that we would have bipartisanship. I think that having reconciliation bill is necessary so that we know that we will guarantee that we'll have results and hopefully give us some leverage with the Republicans. I hope that we can work together.
At a briefing earlier today, Chief COVID-19 advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci encouraging Americans to get vaccinated to protect against the new variants.
The message that we have, when a vaccine becomes available to you, get vaccinated. You will not only be protecting yourself, your family, but you will be making a major step in a positive way to protecting the community.
I'm Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Not just football, folks, that's getting rocked by our haunting of victims that we have in the West. It's other sports too. And those sports were meant to kind of keep us pacified and happy, but the longer we fall apart with our quest to find justice and meaning and have these questions answered, the more we're going to see a lot of our comfortable institutions rocked in unimaginable ways. So buckle up. And joining us now for our Trail Thoughts segment is a friend of the program. He's the publisher at Republic Books, Eric Campman. How you doing, Eric?
Hello, David. Nice to be with you again.
Yes.
Even though I'm in the north and covered with snow, but I miss Florida, but here we are.
Yeah, and it's wherever we're at, we're here at home on this beautiful blue planet, spinning around so fast, and things are exciting as always. But I want to kind of get into some of the interesting things that, we've been talking about off air. And some of that has to do with your experience as a publisher up close with a kind of cancel culture attempt, right?
Yeah, in fact, there are two books I want to just quickly go over. One, which the audience, if they were with us about a month ago, know something about. John Cribb wrote this amazing book called Old Abe. Basically, the last 4 years, the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, and how critical it was, that period. He's not pontificating about it. He's basically describing it because he's put it into the language of a novelist to sort of get closer to Abraham Lincoln as a man, not just as a kind of a statue you see at the Lincoln Memorial. And he succeeds amazingly. Mike Pence called it the best book of Lincoln he's ever read, and many others have gotten all kinds of reviews. But we had a wonderful thing happen, which started as a bad thing. We decided in December to do some social media advertising on Twitter, Google, and others, and of course Facebook. And everything was going very smoothly, and we were starting to see an uptick in sales when Facebook sent our manager of social media a note saying, we reject Old Abe. They never gave us, at that point, they didn't give us an explanation. Later, after the fourth rejection, they basically said, well, it's our policy since the election not to do political books. Now, Abraham Lincoln was not running for president this time. He was president 160 years ago. But that didn't make any difference to Facebook. And that there's a lesson in that, and that is when somebody takes a shot at you and misses, you're in a position to shoot back. And so what we did is John wrote an article about being canceled at Facebook, because that's exactly what happened. We were canceled. And the article was picked up by Real Clear Politics, a well-known, well-distributed political daily, internet daily. And Brian Kilmeade, very famous Brian Kilmeade at Fox and Friends and everywhere else, got a load of what had happened. And he said, I've got to have this guy, this author, John Cribb, on the show. And he had him on the show about 2 weeks ago. And they had a great interview. A lot of happens because the interview has chemistry to it. And this did have it. It was a terrific interview. And it was our first real break on this book, because the book had come out in September, but it really didn't go very far. It didn't go as far as we had wanted. And suddenly Brian just was loving the book. He was loving John Cribbs, and everybody got a kind of great history lesson in that, 7 or 8 minutes he was on national cable TV. Well, guess what happened? It went to number 10 on Amazon, right below 1984. That's kind of funny. And right below also the new The Promised Land, the new Barack Obama book. And it's stayed very high since then. We have shipped out of our first printing, and we are delighted that Amazon shot an arrow at us and missed, and our book has zoomed up the list, and now we're finding the readers we were searching for all spring. All fall, I'm sorry.
So that's
a lesson. That's a lesson in there's points and counterpoints. There is always an answer to a rock being thrown at you. They threw the rock of canceling us, canceling the advertising for no particular good reason. And we said, okay. And we wrote a very reasonable article. I mean, John wrote it and explained what had happened. And then the next thing, and then John is on a national show and is the number 10 book at Amazon. It's come down from there, but it's still selling great. And so you can't just take it. You have to be creative in this world.
Right. Yeah. And it seems as if that's how the hegemonic cultural left, that's how they always lose, is they always overplay their hand with anything. They want to cancel the ability to talk and think and expel anything that deviates from their rigid worldview. And in their overreach, in their expulsion, they get power and attention. They call it the Streisand effect, but it's also related to what Jesus described when he says that the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Of course, that's a bigger thing he's talking about, but that's what goes on 2,000 years since Jesus, because you have this idea that if something's expelled, it draws attention towards it. It draws cultural interest and underdog stories, right? When they say, hey, wait a second, you're trying to push us off. We can't even get advertising, but then it makes people say, well, what's so interesting about this? I need to dive in,
Right, exactly. And you bring up something that has been on my mind, and I think the mind of really millions of people, and that is, where is the church in all of the things going on in the world today? Where is it? Where is its posture? I know we have tons of denominations, non-denominational churches, biblically centered churches, non-biblically centered churches. But I'm kind of curious is where the voice of the church, where it is articulating where it stands in the public square, because I think we're all being drawn, whether we like it or not, into the public square, that there is, we may be in an Esther moment. It's for a time such as this that actually the church is there. I see it in some churches that I watch on, TV because of, but I don't see the voice of the church. It's kind of a whisper, or it's even contrary to the constitutional interests of all the population of America.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what a lot of people were saying. I saw someone commenting today. Actually, let me see if I can find it real quick, because it's related to what you just kind of laid out about where the church is. Someone had
hiding.
Yeah, well, look, someone named Chris Baker said, "What did Christianity do to oppose this nonsense in 2020? It did nothing. I hope it's finally dead." What's your response to something like that, Eric? That's a listener on one of my videos.
What was the last word? I hope they finally what?
I hope it's finally dead, Christianity, because they did nothing to help us in this last year of craziness.
Well, I think if you're hoping that, you're part of the devil's party. You don't want the church dead. I mean, this is not a history lesson, but it doesn't take but 5 minutes to go back and find out what the Soviet communist elite did in 1917 through 1924 when Lenin died. They went in and basically closed the church down, put their own people in, knocked down cathedrals. It was going to be a secular Marxist society. But it wasn't only there. It was in Nazi Germany. One of the first things Hitler did when he finally became chancellor in like 1932 or 1933, not only did he scheme to have the Reichs, whatever that building was, the Reichstag, burnt down, which gave him emergency powers, but then he went into the church, and if a pastor or priest was reluctant to help out the German Nazi cause, they would end up in a prison camp somewhere, and they'd put their own people in. In other words, they were destroying the heart and soul of the church, which in the whole history of the church has been oppositional to much of what we call the culture. The culture has a tendency towards corruption. The church has a tendency to raise up Jesus Christ in what it is doing in this world. And I think that the times are changing in the United States, and we can't look at it as kind of the sweet, comfy place that we have known for my lifetime. So I think that it's a huge issue because a lot of churches are incredibly reluctant to take sides. I don't think this is a side. This is a constitution. If that is taken away from us, we have to ask the question, we hope that our rulers are going to be, what did George Bush call it? Kind of kind and sweet, or
compassionate.
He had a word for it. What?
He called it compassionate conservatism. That's one word I remember.
Yeah, well, it really was.
Oh, you're talking about George Bush Sr. Yeah, kindler, gentler. Yeah, something like that, right?
Kinder and gentler. Christianity which will be run over by the people that want to run it over. And we've gotten a little bit of a taste of it in 2020. We can't avoid what seems to be happening in our culture, our country.
So what is the role of the church? Should the church be pragmatic voices at the seat of the king's table, or should we be prophetic voices that are challenging the king when they go unjust?
Well, I mean, I brought up Esther, and she put her life on the line. And eventually, and this happened in the church throughout the world. And you saw what happened in Europe when the wall came down in 1989. The churches just came out of the darkness and, blossomed like an accelerated spring. It was unbelievable. And it's still unbelievable how strong the church is. But the church is the people. It's not, Jesus never was in opposition to the people. He was always in opposition to the Pharisees, or the ruling class. What did the ruling class do when they found one of Jesus' disciples preaching Jesus Christ, Stephen? They made him a martyr, the first Christian martyr. He was stoned, and Paul was there. He was one of the stoners because he had not met up with Jesus Christ at Damascus yet. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the whole point of the church is sometimes the culture is very quiet and the church has a good life doing its thing, which is fine. And sometimes the times call for a different kind of reaction. And I don't know what that looks like, but I think our comfort zone is going to be very different than it has been in the recent past in America.
Yeah, that's interesting. Our comfort zone is going to be very different than what we're used to in recent past. That's an interesting thing to percolate on. We're going to take a quick break and get Eric Kampman, our guest and publisher at Republic Books, to expand on this. What does that look like? That our comfort zone of what we've become accustomed to may be changing quickly in dramatic ways beyond what we've been used to in our recent times. So we'll take a quick break and return after this short break. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved two people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Get the best coverage of the big game from a source you can trust. TampaBay.com. Powered by the Tampa Bay Times award-winning sports department, you'll get insights on the X's and O's, plus the latest updates from on and off the field. Subscribe now, and you'll receive an additional 20% off total access to TampaBay.com. From the greatest game of all time to the greatest quarterback of all time, choose the Tampa Bay Times. Go to TampaBay.com today.
A Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Gronowski. We're doing our Trail Thoughts segment, and we're doing it with Eric Kampman, who's a book publisher at Republic Books. And I want to return to your point you made, Eric, before the segment break, which is we need to get used to things that we felt comfortable with changing very quickly, right?
Well, I would say that is foundational for everything else that will follow. And I just want to, I have spent the better part of my life trying to break out of the shell I created for myself that actually was cutting myself off from effectiveness in the world. And I feel that I have accomplished that by this point, maybe late in the day, but it doesn't matter. In fact, point number one, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how young you are, but you have to have some level of faith. I wrote about this on my blog today, about belief. And I have said, maybe on this show, but I've said that mankind, women and men, are belief machines. We cannot live without belief. So the question of belief is always on the table. But what comes after that is, well, what do I believe in? Myself, my car, my country, what? No. I mean, as a Christian, the only thing that really matters to you is believing that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he came to save men and women from their sins and to redeem them so that they can become effective warriors for God in this world. Mm-hmm. And when I say warriors, I mean warriors. I mean, no struggle is easy. And I think the church is going to be facing a decision whether it wants to be sort of a cave where people hide, or if it wants to become a beacon of light for in this world for saving the country, saving its Constitution. This is what Lincoln was all about. He was all about saving the country. That included the Emancipation Proclamation, which ended at least ended legally, the slavery that actually was contradictory to everything that was said in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So Lincoln is one of the great heroes of the American Republic. So I think the second thing is have a plan. And we have a book coming up. I believe it's going to be published in early April. It's by a fellow who was a Green Beret named Jim Hansen. We just acquired this book a few weeks ago. It has David, I'm going to send you the cover, but it has an astonishingly beautiful cover and has a great title, Winning the Second Civil War Without Firing a Shot. And Kurt Schlichter, who is a well-known columnist and a former Green Beret, a lawyer, former Green Beret, it says on the cover, former Green Beret, Jim Hansen knows about insurgencies. If we're wise enough to follow his advice, we'll win this war without there being any war at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that having a strategy of not falling into a real civil war, of not having insurgencies of attacks on the Capitol or attacks in Seattle or Portland that are basically contrary to what this country really is all about. We're meant to have we are allowed to have different points of view, and we can argue them out in the public square. And the church is part of that discussion. If it exceeds that discussion to others, it will have no place at the table at all.
Right. And that's, unfortunately, the church tends to want to, at least the institutional top leadership of churches tend to want to settle with establishment governments to try to have a seat at the king's table rather than to challenge and turn over the tables, just like Jesus did when he saw abuse going on around him,
But when I say the church, I'm not talking about the people that ordained. I'm talking about the congregation. I think it's time for people, the leaders in the church, to ask the minister, what do you really believe? What is your belief? What is your core belief? I know it's written down in the bylaws and everything. What do you believe? Because I think it's very important to know that the person leading the sheep is not a false shepherd. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that's a starting point. What do you believe? I don't think you should take it for granted they believe what you believe.
Right. Well, that's probably going to be something that we'll see play out a lot more when people reveal their true colors and kind of settle for safe mediocrity versus risky excellence. I think Jesus wants us to be striving for risky excellence, which requires skin in the game, which requires going against the prevailing narratives of the time, which ultimately are like whitewashed tombs. They're pretty on the outside, but they hide dead bodies on the inside.
Yeah, I think that it's very important for each one of us to get over the big me. Our life is not about our life will come to an end at some point, and it soon will be forgotten thereafter. It's bad news, but the good news is if you have your life in Christ, it's a new life, and it renews itself every day. Trust me. I am, I should be retired. I'm not retired. I'm more engaged in life than I've ever been in my life. And the reason for that is I've shed so much of the me stuff that would inhibit action because I was always afraid of what somebody else would think. Well, I have to think for myself. And I think within the Christian context, within the biblical view of reality and the truth of Jesus Christ, I don't have to go preach that. I just have to go live that.
What would the current you say to the 30-year-old you or the 20-year-old you?
Well, I think you need to do an inventory in the cellar of your life of what is down there. Is it a bunch of rats running around? Is it damp? Is the heater malfunctioning? What is in your cellar? Because that's what you believe.
Right.
And I would say move out of the cellar and move into the center part of the house, or even into the center part of the house is where you belong, where it's operational and where you're operational, and where you're not cluttering yourself with things that are just absolutely stopping you from what God saw in you the day you were born, the day you were conceived. Just kind of paraphrasing Psalm 51. David was filled with wisdom, and his wisdom was, we don't start the second we come out of the womb. We started way before then. And God had an intention for every baby that has been born into this world. So that's what I believe. And when you start living that belief, man, it just changes your whole compass totally.
Right. Well, that's something that we need to think about, is that we don't have enough people calling us to put skin in the game instead of just looking to blame somebody else for all of our problems. That's all I see in the news today is convenient narratives to blame other people, blame the left, blame the right, blame this group, blame that race, blame this creed, blame this whatever. And at the end of the day, none of that's going to give you what you need, is it?
I call it rationalization. It's not blaming, it's rationalization. It's finding a reason for you doing the wrong things.
Right. Well, Eric, is a lot of good food for thought on today's Trail Thoughts, a lot of things to ponder. Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
That it's always a joy to be with you, David.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's same to you. So let's continue this discussion next time on Trail Thoughts, and we'll part at this point. But look, the challenges that we face are many. Our culture is being rocked by a lot of different forces, tearing it apart. And we don't have time to, like Eric was saying, rationalize things away or to make excuses or to shame shift onto somebody else's shoulders our problems. We have to look in the mirror and change the things that we don't like in our own life. Get rid of the things that we've been holding on to, the false idols. And then we'll have clear eyes. We'll be able to see clearly where we need to go. So I'm David Vanoski. It's been a pleasure speaking with our friend Eric Kampman of Republic Books. And that's it for Hour 1. We'll be back for Hour 2 with Scott Horton. But for now, Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
From ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. President Biden says he's going big and acting fast when it comes to the next round of relief for Americans, businesses, and communities.
We can't do too much here. We can do too little.
Republicans say they want smaller direct checks and other cuts to the $1.9 trillion proposal. The president says that's non-negotiable.
I'm not cutting the size of the checks. They're going to be $1,400, period. That's what the American people were promised.
Senate and House Democrats passing measures now to use reconciliation, which allows them to pass the bill with a simple majority. The Labor Department, meantime, showing 49,000 jobs were added in January. Those are modest gains in a year of big changes and losses. ABC's Deirdre Bolton has more.
From a larger view, a staggering statistic. The end of 2020 brought the sharpest rise in the U.S. poverty rates.
Hey, Scott.
Are we doing video or just audio?
Just audio. So, you're on our queue right now. The show will start here in about 4 minutes, and he'll go in with right in with you.
Okay, I'll be here.
Awesome.
Thanks.
A newly surfaced video shows Trump advisor Roger Stone in Washington, D.C. on the morning of January 6th, standing by members of the Oath Keepers militia group just hours before the deadly riots. Stones repeatedly said he had nothing to do with the actions that day. House investigators hope to use that and testimony from the president's White House advisors on why he waited so long to order troops to the Capitol and if they think he encouraged the insurrection.
Oscar-winning actor Christopher Plummer has died.
Christopher Plummer had over 200 credits to his name, from The Sound of Music
This is your new governess, Fräulein Maria.
to most recently Knives Out.
You have to do exactly what I tell you.
His longtime friend and manager Luke Pitt says Plummer died Friday morning at his home in Connecticut. His wife of 53 years, Elaine Taylor, by his side.
ABC's Jason Nathanson. Plummer was 91. You're listening to ABC News.
This is an advertisement. Paid non-attorney spokesperson Ricky LeBlanc, admitted in Massachusetts only. Sokolov Law LLC, Chestnut Hill, Mass. Paul J. Morgan, Winter Park, Florida. Greg Hoppy, New Jersey. Michael Bro Gonzalez, admitted Louisiana. While this firm maintains joint responsibility, most cases of this type are referred to other attorneys for principal responsibility. Mesothelioma. If you know what mesothelioma is, you or someone you love has likely been affected by this devastating cancer. You may be entitled to compensation. Call Sokolov Law today. 1-800-578-2400. The only known cause of mesothelioma is asbestos exposure. Thousands of U.S. veterans and trade workers are at risk for the disease. Nearly $30 billion in court-ordered trust has been set aside to pay money to asbestos victims. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, call now. You may be able to receive compensation without ever going to court or filing a lawsuit. Call for a free legal consultation at 1-800-578-2400. That's 1-800-578-2400. 1-800-578-2400.
CDC officials say data suggests schools don't have as high transmission rates as other areas and may be able to reopen safely without teachers first getting vaccinated, but also say they will issue more guidance soon. Today, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said President Biden is also waiting for further CDC guidance. The debate over reopening in-person learning now front and center along a highway in Arizona.
Like many states in Arizona, there is an intense debate over whether now is a time to go back to in-person classroom learning. This dad says, no, not yet.
I really feel like taking the time to be safe right now is going to be the better outcome at the end.
But other parents and groups of doctors say it is time. The children are being hurt by being out of school. Now, along a freeway in Tempe, a billboard has gone up that says Tempe schools are failing kids and to open schools. The Tempe School District says the billboard is a divisive distraction. Alex Stone, ABC News.
In Myanmar, police arrested another key aide of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi, and there are reports of more arrests in the ongoing anti-coup protests. Teachers and students have now joined the growing demonstrations as civil disobedience gains momentum there. The military blocking Facebook in that country. Citizens have been criticizing the coup and organizing campaigns on social media. This is ABC News.
Ready to create your own income with your own home-based business where there's no such thing as getting laid off? If a billionaire entrepreneur spent 5 years and $20 million searching for the next big trend, wouldn't you want to know what he found? If you're serious about making money from home without having to leave home, then write this down. www.goherenext.com. You decide your income. Get the facts now. GoHereNext.com.
I'm Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Hello, this is David Kronosky with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pastures beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
You can't have a fresh outlook on the new year if you're staring through a chipped or cracked windshield. Autoglass America will fix it and give you up to $150 cash back to help pay holiday bills. With qualifying insurance, we'll come to you with mobile service and install a premium quality replacement with a lifetime warranty at no cost to you. Get a great outlook on the new year with a new windshield and New Year's cash from Autoglass America. 813-96-GLASS, 813-96-GLASS.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be with you all across FM and AM, podcast and video stream. And now we're going to have a great discussion with something that doesn't get enough attention, of course, from the corporate press, and that is the truth of America's war on terror. And the author who will be with us today, there's a quote from his new book, from Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower. He says, if you only read one book this year on America's unending war on terror, it should be this persuasive and devastatingly damning account of how the United States created the original Al-Qaeda terrorism threat by its own actions, and then increased that threat by orders of magnitude by its wanton killings in one country after another in the name of counterterrorism. Once I started reading it, I couldn't stop. And that's a description for the new book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, by our guest now, Scott Horton. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me again.
It's always great having you on because you really come with the facts. You come with the details. You don't mince words with getting to the nitty-gritty of what's been going on in the war on terror. And I've been hearing a lot of great things about your book, not just that quote, but many other people are buzzing that you really bring the receipts in this book, Enough Already.
Yeah, well, you know what? I know that the burden is on me to show that, yes, I'm right and everyone else is wrong for believing in this stuff. And so I have to show in, the words of the people I'm criticizing mostly that what I say about them is right.
Right.
And I would say, I hope that this is how this book reads, not just for people in the libertarian movement or people in the anti-war movement or who, are for whatever reason kind of disposed to like it. But I hope kind of for everybody's, friend who they want to convince, I hope that this book can do that. I think that I certainly was trying to bring a strong enough case to really change people's minds about this, to understand that it doesn't have to be this way. It never had to be this way. And as Ellsberg says there, our government got us into this mess, and then they made matters worse. Now it's time to just stop.
Right. So why this book and why now? What is it that made you say, because, you've been talking about foreign policy, and for those who don't know, you're the director of the Libertarian Institute, you're the editorial director of antiwar.com, and you host Anti-War Radio in Los Angeles, the Scott Horton Show on scotthorton.org. So, but all of your work is always examining the foreign policy blunders, examining it on, with, firsthand accounts and things on the ground that people just don't hear in the big major newspapers. But why now? What is the big, the impetus behind this book?
Why now? Because I finally got it done. It's the real answer to that. Nah, I've been working on this for a while, and as I think we may have discussed this before. My previous book about Afghanistan started out as this book, and then I just got bogged down on chapter 2, and it became a whole book. I mean, the war's been going on for 20 years, 17 by the time I put it out there. And there was so much to say, I just couldn't quite wrap it up. And so it ended up being a book about Afghanistan. But this is the book that I meant to write in the first place. It was actually Tom Wood's idea in the first place, that let's together write a book that's sort of the war on terrorism for dummies. In other words, a short, really brief take on here's what you really need to know about each one of the wars. Mm-hmm. And then, he has 1,000,001 obligations of his own. So it ended up just becoming my project. And as I say, I did the Afghanistan book, and then I took a little bit of time, and then I went back to the drawing board with this thing. And of course, it ended up not being for dummies 150 pages. It's a good 300 pages, but it is every war since 79. So it is a brief take on each one of the wars, but it's what I think you really need to know. And the thing of it is, too, that it's not like a secret history. I'm not an investigative reporter here to, there's some original journalism in it, not too much, but I'm not here to I got the secret source that reveals the secret Pentagon black op that did the thing that you never heard of before. It's not really like that. What it really is it's an alternative history of everything that you already know, but just as told by me that you ain't got a chance to hear yet, but you need, I think. And so in other words, your dad or your Uncle Bob, they know that Ronald Reagan backed Saddam Hussein against Iran in the 1980s. That's not a secret, and I'm not blowing the lid off of that. But what I am doing is I'm explaining why Jimmy Carter began this policy in the first place. And I'm explaining why Ronald Reagan kept the policy. And I'm explaining how this led to Iraq War I. And then I'm explaining how Iraq War I led to the Bill Clinton policy of the permanent Iraq War 1.5 and the sanctions and the blockade, and how that then led to the terrorist war against us, and then our war against the terrorists, which became the excuse for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in other words, I'm telling the story of the history of the last 40 years that everybody already knows. It's just I'm putting it in the proper order and context for you so that you can understand. And, if you go to youtube.com/Scott Horton Show, we're just starting to put out a video series that I recorded with this great a video director named Gus Cantivero. And it's essentially me doing essentially like 5 or 6 minutes per chapter of the book, explaining my way, like the video version of Enough Already, essentially. And so far we put out 4 chapters. There's going to be 14. And so far we put out 4 chapters: Carter, Reagan, Bush Sr., and Clinton. And I saw last night that the first comment on the Clinton one, episode 4, chapter 4, was, aha, now I get it. Dots connected. And so, and not dots connected like in a kooky way, like, oh, conspiracy theory dots, but just, I always knew that we backed Saddam, and I always knew that the thing with the Ayatollah, and not sure our relationship with Saudi and how that led to the thing in Kuwait, and why it was that we had the Shiite uprising, but then betrayed it in the spring of 91. And so everybody knows already, not everybody, but many people are very familiar with this story, but not as much with the whys and why it was that they made the choices that they made, whether it's Reagan or Bush or Clinton or on from there. So I really, and I'm told already by people that, yeah, it works. That was what it was supposed to do, was get you to see the last 40 years my way. And by the end of the book, you will. I know you will.
So let's start with that. Let's start with Carter. Let's jump into it. And, I heard that you in your book, you steel man, which is the opposite of straw manning the opponent's argument. So, we can try to steel man it as best as we can, and that's a good thing to do, to try to give them the best version of their argument. But you said that, the problems, I guess you're starting with Carter, where he's, getting involved with Saddam Hussein. Is that right? Or what's the story here? How can we set this up?
That's right. Well, so he's got the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. He's got the beginning of intervention in Afghanistan and support for the Mujahideen there in an attempt to provoke the Soviets into invading. Then when the Soviets do invade, then they go, oh no. Now we've got a weakened Iran that we no longer control after the Iranian Revolution. And the Soviets are in Afghanistan. And now we're afraid they're going to invade Iran next. And then they could dominate the Persian Gulf.
Right.
So Carter then announced the Carter Doctrine that said, you better not try it, Russians, or we'll go to war with you. That this is now an American lake, and we will use military force to prevent any other power from attempting to become the dominant power in the Persian Gulf. That's it. And we've been stuck with that ever since. And they've escalated that doctrine ever since. But at the time, then, the immediate expression of that was the beginning of building bases in not just Saudi Arabia, but in Qatar and UAE and Bahrain and the rest. That was really the beginning of that whole project. And even though we'd had an alliance with the Saudis since the 30s, and we'd had bases there from time to time, especially in the 1960s, and things like that, but not on this kind of permanent basis. And also, Jimmy Carter gave the green light to Saddam Hussein to invade Iran. And, you know, I'm not sure how many people listening to this know this history or how widespread this history is, but I had to learn this just by reading books. I never heard anyone discuss this ever when they discussed the Iranian Revolution. But the revolution happened in February of 1979. And it should be obvious, the Ayatollah was in exile in Paris, France. Well, why'd the French let him get on the plane and go home? Well, because the State Department and CIA told Jimmy Carter to be fine. We like the Ayatollah. He helped us overthrow Mossadegh 25 years ago in the coup of 53. We can get along with him. And he hadn't really been part of the plot, but he'd been part of a group of conservative clerics who had protested against Mossadegh and helped to destabilize the place and was working for the CIA in destabilizing the country and priming Mossadegh for the coup. So he was, you know, part of a group that the CIA thought, oh, we like these guys, we can deal with them. But then once they came to power, we did deal with them. And the Carter government was giving them intelligence, warning them about threats from Russia and threats from Saddam Hussein. And they were getting along okay until November. It wasn't until the end of the year, 10 months later, that David Rockefeller convinced, who was the chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank, and of course, you know, the Rockefellers had major oil interests in Iran, and had a long time, deep relationship with the Shah, and he convinced Jimmy Carter to let the Shah into the United States for cancer treatment, and that's what caused the riot and the seizing of the hostages, because they thought that meant they didn't know he was dying of cancer, which he was. They thought the idea that he was getting medical treatment meant we were going to do a coup and reinstall him back in power again, cancel their revolution. And that was what caused the riot and the seizing of the hostages. I'm not saying that's great, but I'm just saying this didn't all happen at once. Right. It was at the end of the year. The revolution was in February. The seizing of the hostages was in November. And so it wasn't just one big thing where these people declared us the great Satan and their enemy forever on the first day in this kind of irreconcilable way. It was more complicated than that. But anyway, this was the policy then that the Reagan administration picked up, was support for Saddam Hussein, who had already failed to topple the government in Tehran and had been, beaten back to the border. And then that became, for the entire Reagan era, for the entire 8 years of Ronald Reagan throughout the 1980s, was the Iran-Iraq War, where estimates range between 500,000 and 1 million people killed in this kind of World War I style stalemate, where America backed Iraq and our allies, the Israelis, backed Iran the whole time to bleed them both. And then it was a dispute over debts from that war that led to Iraq War I. Because Kuwait, Saudi, and UAE had loaned Saddam Hussein a bunch of money to fight that war because he was fighting for their interests too, in supposedly containing the Shiite revolution in Iran, which had its friends and adherents in Shiite parts of Iraq, and I'm not so sure about Kuwait, but certainly in Shiite parts of Saudi Arabia as well, which happens to be where all the oil is. And so they were worried about this, and they were worried about whether Shiite or Sunni, They were worried about Islamic clerics claiming to have a higher moral authority to rule than local kings and emirs and sultans, which was a precedent that the Saudis, severely resented and hoped would not spread to threaten their rule. Mm-hmm. So they all supported Saddam in that war. But then when the war was over, oil was selling at like $10 a barrel, and he couldn't rebuild his country and he couldn't repay his war debts. And instead of negotiating and being reasonable about it, the Kuwaitis were sticking their finger in his eye and, insulting the people of Iraq. I won't repeat the insult here on the radio, but saying horrible things to the people of Iraq and arranging meetings and then not showing up and things like this. And so the Iraqis invited called the American ambassador, April Glaspie, on July 25th, 1990. And she said, listen, we see you're moving your tanks and your troops toward the Kuwaiti border. We wish you wouldn't do that. Oh, and the Kuwaitis also were overproducing from their shared oil wells right in the border region there, the Rumelia oil fields. And Saddam Hussein tells her that, they won't negotiate with us. So what are we supposed to do? And it's very clear. We have had for years and years the Iraqi version of the transcript of the meeting. But now, thanks to the heroic Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, we have the State Department's own version of the meeting, which is almost identical in every major way. And it's clear that Glaspie was giving Saddam Hussein a flashing yellow light. We're not telling you outright do it, but we are telling you we won't stop you from doing it, and we won't be too upset about it, and we're not too concerned about your border dispute with Kuwait. And as Ambassador Glaspie later told the New York Times, we didn't think he's going to take the whole country.
Let's take a quick,
I elaborated
Scott, let's take a quick break, and we'll
Sure.
return with Scott Horton as we unpack this lead up into Iraq War I, as we explore some of the ideas in Scott Horton's new groundbreaking book, Enough Already. Back in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Some out-of-the-area law firms advertise that they are the largest. Do you think large firms help your case? Possibly. But your case will receive personal care from local attorneys Catania and Catania. They are family-owned, Tampa Bay attorneys representing clients who have experienced auto and motorcycle accidents. Your case with Catania and Catania will seek to get a settlement in your favor expeditiously. Catania and Catania, serving Tampa Bay families for over 28 years. Referrals on request. Get the local law firm that will care for your case from beginning to end. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. Catania and Catania, putting families first. Car accident, motorcycle accident, Call the local attorneys, Catania and Catania. Offices Tampa. Not attorney spokesperson.
Enough already. It's time to end the war on terrorism. That's the book by Scott Horton, our guest today. And Scott, we've got a short little 5-minute segment here, but we'll resume. But I want to just kind of let you land the plane about this yellow light, as you describe it, leading up to the Iraq War I, where the American government gives kind of a yellow light, which you say is backed up by the transcripts, for Saddam Hussein to go into Kuwait, right?
That's right. And, it's not just, harsh revisionist critics like myself. The Harvard professor, Stephen Walt, kind of the dean of the realist school, the very adult, reasonable, moderate school of American foreign policy, wrote at foreignpolicy.com when the American version of the transcript came out that, geez, the way that she phrases this, and he's not reading her mind or motives, but he's saying, boy, the way she says this to Saddam Hussein, that President Bush would very much like to avoid a war, has no interest in fighting a war in this region, could very well be read to mean go right ahead. We won't fight a war against you if you do, because a war with Kuwait wasn't really in the cards, right? It was just a coup de main. You just roll your tanks right in and it's over. There's hardly any fighting at all. That's not a war. That's just a takeover. And that was what was in the offing, clearly. And so even when she says, oh, geez, we don't want to see a war happen, that even if it's, let's say, poorly phrased, Saddam Hussein could have very well read that as diplomatic language, meaning, well, geez, I don't know. Like when I was a kid at the skate park and steal a cigarette out of the owner's pack while he's pretending to not look, and that was the deal. And James Baker made it clear after, the Secretary of State, that he didn't want to fight. They didn't want to have a war. At their first big meeting after Iraq invaded Kuwait, Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They held the first big meeting, and he drew the line, said, let's draw the line at Saudi Arabia. We don't care about Kuwait. Forget Kuwait. And they all agreed. Cheney and Scowcroft and the whole group of the national security staff, principals of George H.W. Bush's government agreed about that. But then Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who had severe investments in Kuwait, and also the Kuwaitis had severe investments in British debt and had a major interest in the outcome of this. She called Bush out at a meeting in Aspen and said, don't you go wobbly on me now, Bush, which in other words meant you can't be less of a man than I am, right? And he took up that challenge and said, no, this will not stand. And then he spent the next 6 months refusing to negotiate with Saddam Hussein, even though Hussein, he had just been Reagan and Bush's guy. He didn't want to fight them. Bush had been selling him weapons up until the time he invaded Kuwait. And he wanted to negotiate an out, and Bush wouldn't let him.
Very interesting. Scott, you've really narrated this portion of the war on terror. Very interesting. This is very interesting stuff to digest, and we're going to unpack some more of this, because we're going to give people the best little snapshot we can of the mind of Scott Horton, documenting the important events that we just don't understand because of the negligence of media and mainstream media just not wanting to dive into the uncomfortable facts that are documented by primary sources in your book. Enough already. So let's take a quick break. And yes, we're live on FM and AM, but you can also ask us a comment on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try to get Scott's reaction to your questions, if you have any, in the course of this broadcast. Back in just a moment with more with Scott Horton.
Grove, you saw what's going on today.
Crazy things are happening.
You cannot be afraid. You've got to stand up for what you believe is right.
But one thing is for sure.
You can't trust anybody.
For talk, news, and information, you can count on us.
Enough is enough. I mean, I almost blew a gasket.
Good for the country.
I know what I'm talking about. A lot of wackos out there.
Your connection to talk about it. The all-new News Talk 1040, WHB.
Congressional Democrats moving ahead with a budget reconciliation plan, which will allow them to pass President Biden's American Rescue Plan without Republican support.
The American Rescue Plan is badly needed to make sure that this pandemic isn't another generational setback for racial equality.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, more than 1,100 troops are being sent to speed up the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby.
We expect that they'll be able to get on site on or about the 15th of this month.
The deployment is part of President Biden's plan to set up dozens of mass vaccination centers nationwide. Laissez les bon temps brûler? Maybe not. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell says the city's bars will be closed for Mardi Gras to slow the spread of COVID-19. The famous parades are also canceled. Actor Christopher Plummer, best known for playing the dashing Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music, has died at the age of 91. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
So we return now to A Neighbor's Choice. We're live with Scott Horton of The Scott Horton Show. You can visit their website, scotthorton.org, and check out his new book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. So, Scott, I want to pick up where we left off, where, let's take it from there. So we're talking about the lead up to this Iraq War One. And you say that there's a yellow light given, basically indicated, go ahead, I'm not looking, I'm going to look the other way.
Right.
But then...
And the point here being, I'm not carrying a brief for Saddam Hussein, but the point is that H.W. Bush just was lying when he said that this man is the new Adolf Hitler, and he wants to conquer the entire Middle East, and we have to stop him, and all these things. That's not what it was. It was a dispute over war debts. Debts accrued during a war that we had supported him in that war. That was just the other day at the time. Vice President H.W. Bush became the president. They were on the 10th year of the Reagan-Bush era administration, so to speak. Colin Powell had been Reagan's national security advisor. Now he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? I mean, there was continuity here with these men. James Baker had been Reagan's chief of staff for a while, I'm pretty sure, and was now Secretary of State. So it was the same group of men, and they were essentially stabbing their client in the back and making an example out of him. As Bush Sr. put it, this is the new world order. What we say goes. And in this case, this is an excuse, essentially. We found a reason to go expand our footprint in the Middle East and establish ourselves, now that the Soviets are out of our way, as the unipolar power. And you know what? I'm sorry, because I know conservatives do get really offended about this kind of thing. It sounds like the kind of thing a hippie would do, and then they get emotional like a hippie would do. But the fact of the matter is that when a conservative is complaining about this, they say, well, we don't want to be the policeman of the world. Okay, well, what does that mean? And that means America is the dominant political and military force on the planet. We are the superpower. Remember, there used to be two superpowers, us and the Soviets. Now there's just us. And in the last 30 years, since the fall of the Soviet Empire, the American empire did not come home. We didn't choose limited republic. We didn't elect Ron Paul in 1988. We elected George H.W. Bush. And instead of choosing republic over empire, he chose world empire. And he expanded America's power and influence as much as he could, which is, I guess, smart in the short term, but only self-destructive in the long term, as we can see. And remember, he promised then, I was in 9th grade at the time, and he said, this will not be another Vietnam. And yet, that was 30 years ago, and we're still bombing. Iraq. My book came out on January the 16th, the 30th anniversary of Iraq War I. We haven't stopped bombing them yet. Even in the lull in 2011, 12, 13, we still had a drone war going on, at a minimum. Never stopped for 30 years now after the start of that war, and against a guy who was a client who was willing to fall in line. All he wanted was a couple of, face-saving little tokens on the way out of Kuwait, and Bush wouldn't let him have it and chose war instead.
So what turned Bush so crowing about the New World Order and exercising muscular might? Was it just Margaret Thatcher questioning his manhood because she had debts there?
Yeah, I mean,
That's it?
I think, well, I mean, there were the hawks in the administration who were pushing. And then once she kind of made a fool out of him, that kind of tipped the argument in favor of the interventionists. And then from there, I'm sure you remember.
So she went all Rihanna on him.
I was just in high school, but
she went Rihanna
Bush
on him.
sure
She was
loved
saying,
being a war president.
Yeah.
Iraq War I was such a huge event.
Right.
And he said at the time, by God, we've beat the Vietnam syndrome. That was Americans' reluctance to support any more wars after the disaster of Vietnam. And Robert Perry, the reporter, said he thought this was a major reason for the war, was essentially, bottom line, as a psychological operation against the American people, that we need to have a good, quick, and easy one that everybody can really get on board for and cheer for and tie a yellow ribbon around a tree, and it'll be a success in 6 or 8 weeks. Ain't no jungle Ho Chi Minh Trail here. It's wide open, flat desert. We'll decimate their armor. We'll make a cakewalk out of it, and we'll get the American people back on board for the war overall, for war in general. And Brent Scowcroft, the former general who was Bush Senior Secretary of Defense, he said he wanted to get rid of what had been called the Weinberger-Powell Doctrine, more famously known as the Powell Doctrine, which was essentially how to keep us out of war, written by a guy who saw the aftermath of Vietnam. And so it said, we can't get in a war unless we go through everything on St. Thomas Aquinas' just war theory checklist and then some, right? We have to know that we're going to win in a very short amount of time with overwhelming force, and we have a perfect exit strategy and all of these kinds of things. And Scowcroft said one of the reasons he wanted to do the war was to destroy that, even though they would abide by the Powell Doctrine in the war. The war itself would prove that we don't need any stinking Powell doctrines to restrain us. Mm-hmm. And then I'm spending too much time on Iraq War I because the point is then that they stayed forever. There was the Shiite uprising that Bush encouraged and then betrayed, and then the no-fly zones that were launched in the name of it, and then the sanctions regime that had been launched against Iraq after they invaded Kuwait stayed the whole time through the end of Bush Sr. and through the end of Bill Clinton's years. And they also adopted this dual containment policy of Iraq and Iran from these bases in Saudi at the behest of the Israelis. And it was these bases in Saudi Arabia, more than any other thing, that motivated the Mujahideen, especially the Arab Afghans who had gone to fight in the war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union in the 1980s, in the war started by Carter and then supported by Reagan, which Rambo 3 is about it. Everyone knows it was the great success when we helped the Mujahideen beat the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And not only that, it helped break the last straw that broke the camel's back of the Soviet Union, or one of the last straws that helped destroy this entire Soviet empire. And they decided to turn against us and to try to do the same thing to us that we had helped them do to the Soviets, which was attack them until they take the bait and invade. Mm-hmm. And so they said, well, we're already at war with them by supporting their dictatorships and by supporting the Israelis and by bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia the whole 1990s long, whether the Americans thought of it as peacetime or not. They didn't. And they were attacking us all through the 1990s and culminating in September 11th because they were trying to provoke us into making a stupid overreaction, getting carried away, believing too much in our own power to have our own way, and especially to invade Afghanistan. And that's exactly what we gave them. And then, and this is not unique from me. I mean, this is critics of the war on terrorism at all levels have talked about this all along. The former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, Michael Scheuer, a very conservative Catholic Republican, right? No hippie, believe me. And he said that going to Afghanistan is what bin Laden always wanted. Going to Iraq was a hoped for but unexpected gift to bin Laden. Getting rid of the secular socialist infidel Saddam Hussein with his French beret and his clean-shaven chin and his secular fascist dictatorship that he ruled in Iraq, bin Laden could have never bet that America would go that far for him. And now, David, if that's true, then what do we say about knocking off the secular dictator Saleh in Yemen and knocking off the secular dictator Gaddafi in Libya, and a war for 5 years that didn't quite succeed in knocking off the secular dictator Bashar al-Assad in Syria, but did lead to the rise of the Islamic State Caliphate in eastern Syria and eventually western Iraq, this absolute catastrophe. This is, the 9/11 truthers say that al-Qaeda worked for the CIA all along. Well, you could just as easily turn it around and say the American government, Republicans and Democrats, CIA and the Pentagon, all work for bin Laden and Zawahiri. They've been following the enemy's orders, reading their stage directions off the enemy script for now 20 years long.
And yet they're considered tough on terror by their many supporters in the press and so forth, and think tanks, that somehow this is tough on terror. It's a joke when you think about it, the way you're explaining.
That's right. Just do the arithmetic. In 2001, at the time of the September 11th attack, there were 400 al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. 1,000 if you count all their local kind of Chechen fellow traveler bodyguards and whoever was, local Afghans who were running around with bin Laden and his men. A very small core of less than 1,000 men. And now there's tens of thousands of them spread not just to Mesopotamia, but into the Levant, right? They made it into Lebanon. ISIS made it into Lebanon. It took Hezbollah to drive them out of Lebanon. They hit Latakia in western Syria. They almost seized a base on the Mediterranean Sea. And it was USA, George W. Bush and Barack Hussein Obama were the ones who did all of this for them, period. As simple as that.
How can they be so consistently incompetent?
Well, because they're taking advantage and they think that they're smart and they think that they know what they're doing. And after all, we're talking about what? Some angry guy with an AK-47 yelling Allah in sandals with no armor and no real capacity to really fight. I mean, terrorism is the tactic of the weak. Now they got a really strong one off against the U.S. on September 11th, but look at the recent attacks we've had, right? The two local, in fact, just very recently, it was Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, did 2 attacks, arranged, I guess, for these guys to do these attacks in Corpus Christi, Texas, and Pensacola, Florida, where at the naval air stations where we have these Saudis training. And they killed a couple of guys, and this is the problem too. If you go back to, and this comes from the Hawks too, from the Weekly Standard magazine after September 11th. Part of why they didn't stop the attack is they just didn't take this stuff that seriously. And the quote is, and everybody can look this up, it's the Weekly Standard is gone now, but the Washington Examiner website has saved it all, so you can find it. And the quote is that terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower. And so you think about that, the level of power and influence that they were carrying out against the world at that time in the 1990s is the Pentagon's, the Joint Staff, or the policy planners for the Joint Chiefs, right? For overall, future policy takes and this kind of thing. And they're going, a truck bomb goes off here or there. Who cares? Somebody sets off a rubber dinghy bomb that doesn't succeed in sinking our battleship. Right? They set off a truck bomb at the World Trade Center. It kills 6 people. The tower doesn't fall down. I'm not saying it's forgivable. It's not forgivable, but it is understandable from their point of view. That was how they thought of it. that, who cares about this? It's a nuisance at best. And so even if that's what we're unleashing, think about what we're getting rid of, right? What is out, for example, Al Qaeda in Syria's power compared to Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah? If that's who you hate and that's your enemy, the Israelis, and you could see how they rationalize, as they put it, as their ambassador Michael Oren put it, we prefer the Sunni evil to the Shia evil. We prefer the Islamic State to Assad because Assad is friends with Iran and Hezbollah. Now, the thing about that is I disagree with that. I think that's crazy even from an Israeli point of view, but I'm an American. I don't care about the Israeli point of view. It was Al Qaeda that knocked our towers down, not Hezbollah, not Iran, and not Syria. And so how could it be that some other nation's priorities are our priorities, and our government, namely Barack Obama's government under the CIA, under David Petraeus and John Brennan, completely betrayed their mandate to fight al-Qaeda terrorism and instead took the side of these men against another secular dictator? I mean, when George W. Bush, gave them all of Western Iraq for 5 years, that was a big, stupid accident. But Obama deliberately took their side in Syria, Obama and Biden, for years, leading to the rise of the caliphate. And that's the kind of treason makes Benedict Arnold look like a hero.
Right. We're speaking with Scott Horton about his book, Enough Already. And I want to look at this. I want to get you to address this comment from a viewer online. Steven Stern says, Scott mentioned before that Atta joined Al-Qaeda because of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. If they wanted payback, how come Al-Qaeda never attacked Israel?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think they held the USA as primarily responsible. The argument was we were the far enemy that supported all their near enemies. And until they could get rid of us, there's no point in fighting against Mubarak, Fahd, Abdullah, or Sharon.
We'll take a quick break and return with Scott Horton after this short message. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
Do you despise lawyers? That may be the case until you need one. If you've been in an auto accident and need legal advice, go to the local attorneys that have served Tampa Bay families for over 28 years. Catania and Catania. They are family owned. They understand your legal situation. When you need legal representation, Catania and Catania will care for your case from the beginning to the end of representation. You won't need to worry. Catania and Catania will represent you through the entire process. Auto or motorcycle accidents are too frequent in Florida. Catania and Catania. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. Referrals on request. Contact Catania and Catania. Putting families first. Offices, Tampa. An attorney spokesperson. Panini America is proud to be the exclusive trading card partner of the NFL and NFLPA. Whether you're looking for the hottest rookie cards of young stars like Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa, and more, or must-have keepers from legends like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and more, PaniniAmerica.net is your exclusive destination. PaniniAmerica.net. Visit and start your collection today. Panini America. Hashtag who do you collect?
Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm David Gornosky, your host, here with Scott Horton. He's the host of the Scott Horton Show. You can visit his website, scotthorton.org, and be sure to check out his book, his new book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, which is creating great feedback. I mean, we've got folks in the video stream of our broadcast today saying they've already ordered a copy of the book because of the fascinating facts that they've learned today on this show with Scott. And we're also looking at other folks who are really intrigued about what folks like John Brennan would think about what you have to say. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure John Brennan wouldn't like it too much. I'd like to see him in the stockade. The best excuse that they could try to make for John Brennan would be that he was only backing moderate rebels, not al-Qaeda, but that's a lie, and everybody knows it's a lie. The Saudis were sending jihadis off to fight in Syria from the middle of 2011 on. That's all you need to know right there. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which had been virtually decimated off the face of the earth by the local Iraqi Sunnis, not David Petraeus, thank you very much, back in the final days of Iraq War II, they came across the border with a brand new battlefield to fight. And the United States of America, first with the CIA under David Petraeus and then under John Brennan, helped at first coordinating our ally support, and then with direct support, poured billions of dollars, more than $1 billion a year just from the U.S. And we have that proof from Edward Snowden's leak of the black budget, as published in the Washington Post, where they even admitted the U.S. was pouring in $1 billion a year. And also with our local allies and NATO allies too. So the British and the French were helping, but then especially also the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Turks and the Israelis. We're all working together to support these groups led by literally al-Qaeda in Iraq, the bad guys from Iraq War II, the worst part of the Sunni insurgency from Iraq War II, were the leaders of the insurgency here. And then all the copycat groups, Jaish al-Islam and Ahrar al-Sham and whatever, were no different. When ISIS broke off from Jabhat al-Nusra, that was really just the Iraqi-dominated faction of al-Qaeda in Iraq breaking off from the Syrian-dominated faction of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so the CIA and allied support mostly, well, the Turks and the Saudis kept backing ISIS. Well, I guess the Americans and the Turks were also backing the al-Nusra groups, who were mostly focused in the west of the country. So then in 2013 was when they split apart. And then in 2014, they rolled right into Western Iraq, and they seized Mosul and Fallujah and, Tikrit and Ramadi, eventually Samarra, and they declared a caliphate. A landmass about the size of Great Britain, an army that at one point had possibly as many as 100,000 conscripts in it. They were holding down fights in like 6 major theaters of operation at once. It was estimated they did have possibly as many as 100,000 men at one point. In this just absolute catastrophe, in the George W. Bush years, Glenn Beck and all of these ridiculous hawk liars would say, we're fighting against the Islamo-fascist caliphate, the Islamo-fascist caliphate. But there was no caliphate out there. The world's divided by nation states. What caliphate? There's a Jordan and an Iraq and a Syria in the way of where this caliphate is supposed to go, pal. At the same time, bin Laden was hiding in his attic in Pakistan, fantasizing that, geez, wouldn't it be great if I was magic and could somehow create an Islamo-fascist caliphate? But what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
He's hiding, in exile on the far side of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
But then George W. Bush turns Western Iraq into Jihadistan. And then Barack Obama turns Eastern Syria into Jihadistan.
Mm-hmm.
And then they join again. The one, and for a while they even took bulldozers and erased the giant berm that marked the border between Iraq and Syria and declared this Islamist caliphate, which was like, this guy Baghdadi was same difference if it was bin Laden himself declaring a state, his wildest dream. And it was the USA that made it possible for him. And the reason why, because that does sound crazy, and we did skip a step here. The reason why for that, David, and this is all very provable, and I explain it all in the book, is that the effect of Iraq War II, 2003 through 8 or 11 there, George W. Bush's big one, that war put the Shiite Arab supermajority in power there. And the Bush guys thought, well, they'll need our money and guns more than they need their friends, the Iranians next door at the end of the day. And that was a stupid, wrong bet, and they lost it. The reality is that their kinship and neighbor relationship with the Iranians was much stronger, and they won that race. And so Maliki told Bush, sign here. You got to leave by the end of 2011. And Bush signed it. We lost. They didn't get to keep one base. So they fought the war for the supermajority that didn't need him anymore. And they really resented him.
Mm.
And they knew that they messed up.
Right.
And so they launched, and everyone, please read this. It's so much fun to read. It's just mind-blowing. It's in the New Yorker magazine from 2007 by the great Seymour Hersh, the legendary Seymour Hersh. It's called The Redirection. And it's about how the Bush government realized in 2005, 6, 7, end of 05, beginning of 06 especially, that boy, did we screw up. And now we're putting Iran's best friends in power, and we're on the losing end of this thing.
Mm.
And so to fix that, to make it up to the Saudis, we're going to tilt back toward them and their shock troops, who are the Al-Qaeda terrorists, the very same guys who knocked our towers down. And why would we target Assad? Because Assad is friends with Iran. And if we can't cleanse Baghdad of Shiites the way we did of Sunnis and turn that war around, launch that war all over again, well, maybe we can take Damascus away from them as a consolation prize. And so that was why they targeted Bashar al-Assad. It was not because he had done anything to us, but because that would help to weaken Iran. And of course it didn't. They didn't go far enough to get rid of Assad, and now he's more dependent on Iran than ever before.
Scott, we're out of time, but I just want to get your quick comment, because this stuff, it's closer to home now. We've got a story at NPR this week. Former CIA officer says treat domestic extremism as an insurgency. It's talking about Robert Grenier of the CIA chief for Pakistan and Afghanistan in 2001. He went on to become Iraq mission manager. So
I know it's really scary.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, in fact, he admits in there that we didn't focus on Al-Qaeda after September 11. We decided to target the Taliban instead. And then he's making an analogy. I mean, that's a massive confession right there. Then he says, that's why, never mind the guys that actually did anything at the Capitol. We just need to go after the American populist right at large, because they're the Taliban to those guys Al-Qaeda, which is just completely crazy. I mean, the whole thing at the Capitol wasn't even a real organized attack of any real substance in the first place.
Well, Scott,
but they're madmen and they're in charge.
Yeah, it's I think Barack Obama's pastor said the chickens are coming home to roost. And unfortunately, it's kind of literal there, isn't it? Scott, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program, and I want people to check out your book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. Check it out, folks. Visit Scott at scotthorton.org for more information, more content. Fascinating stuff as always. I'm David Granowski.
Thanks, David.
Godspeed.